And the second speaker is Professor Gregor Wolbring. He's professor at the University of Calgary. And his focus of work is on science and technology, governance, ability studies, disability studies, and sustainability studies. He will speak about medical safety versus societal safety, role of and impact on disabled people. Please, Mr. Wolbring.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Corinne, to organize that workshop, and thanks, Katharina, for the introduction. And thanks to Marcy for her talk. We obviously, worked both of that already on for a long time. So first, I want to thank my student group because because without them, much of the work couldn't be done. And to set the stage, I make you smaller here. The two gene editing conference statements in 2015 and 18 made the points that clinical germline gene editing might be used. That the application proposed range from avoidance of severe inherited disease to enhancement of human capabilities, needs balancing of risk, potential benefit and alternatives, and broad societal consensus, and that public acceptability will likely vary among jurisdictions, leading to different policy responses. If that is the reality, then obviously there are many issues. My assumptions: gene editing is a platform technology. So once it works or seen as safe and having a high utility, it can be used for all kinds of stuff. Once it's right, the scope of use depends on societal discussions and perceptions of medical safety versus social utility. Social safety, especially for marginalized groups, seems not to play a role. And we are constantly shifting the very meaning of health, which is very important if we're talking constantly about the term patient. The disability adjusted life years is a health gap measure developed with the intent to give guidance for allocating medical health treatment dollars, to curtail allocation of inefficiencies. And then Murray, who is, the leader who developed the DALI, states, individuals prefer after appropriate deliberation to extend the life of healthy individuals rather than those in health state worse than perfect health. That one, of course, is questioned by the disability rights movement, as is for quite some time. But if we now apply the notion of enhancement model of health right to the quote, then it would be individuals prefer after appropriate deliberation to enhance the life of healthy individuals rather than treat those in a health state worse than perfect health. And then we get stuff where enhancement medicine will be seen as better than curative medicine, and curative medicine seen right for the species typical for the ones who are at the norm seen as futile and a waste of healthcare dollars. And that will play itself out through gene editing if it becomes more used, whether on the somatic level or on the germline level, because we will change when we want to do something, we want to expand it, and we want to stay within a medical framework. We will simply change what the patient is. And for the Americans, the prime example I normally use is the term learning disability. That one was coined in 1963 as a neurological disorder. And it was a reflection that they changed requirements in schools. A lot of kids couldn't cut it anymore, and then they gave them a new label. We constantly can change what is a disease, and with that, we constantly can change who the patient is. And if the only way to be allowed to do this work is under the patient label, you will simply change who is the patient. As learning disability was not coined as a I learn differently, it was coined as a neurological disorder. So what is the role of disabled people? We have three options how we can even portray them. We can have the medical model of the body, right? So they're diseased. And we have the medical model of disablement and cure. So they are disabled by their body, and therefore the body has to be cured. Then we have the medical model of the body again, but then the social model of disablement, which means also the body might have a problem medically. The disablement originates from the society, and the cure should be a change in society. That's, for example, the model that the UN Convention on the Rights of People, of Persons with Disabilities uses. And then we have the social model of the body, where people refuse to be seen as defective, and social model of disablement and cure. That is, for example, deaf culture and the neurodiverse movement. And then we have the enhancement model of the body and disablement. When in essence, you're only healthy when you're enhanced, and therefore the disablement is because, in essence, you are not enhanced. So it's in essence a medical one, just on steroids. When we're looking at Google Scholar 2021 and added 2022 for terms in these different groups, you see the main one is patients. It's obvious, right? 30,100 or 37,100 with gene editing. And then disabled people, we have 284 or 340, or use people with disabilities, 370, 458. Indigenous people who are, of course have also view on the topic is also very little, 273, 564. Mental health is 3,260 for 2022. And rights in gender and race is higher. But the patient, it shows the patient is through the lens through which we discuss gene editing. And that's a problem, of course, for a disability rights perspective. Right? So it's used by the people, right, to use it. I mean, I already talked about the gene editing summit in the beginning, where it's all about medical and patients and so on. But it's also used by the groups opposing German gene editing. And you just heard more or less the same quote from Marcy, what I have here, taken from a paper of mine. But it's essentially the same what Marcy said. I mean, the focus is on, right, patient, is on, right, and with that about medical safety and right. And so, well, we can do things in other ways where it's medically safer, right? And I think that's a huge, huge problem, because I think safety is a stopgap measure. Safety is like what people get used to. And so eventually there will be a time when, right, when people think it's safe enough, especially if, right, the social utility is very high. The Hingston group is, right, who is a group of ethicists working on the topic that, from a while ago, says policies governing science nationally and internationally ought to be flexible so as to accommodate the rapid science advancement, as well as the change in social values that fits with that. Eventually it might move to germline because they think they can get away with it, because they think the system is ready for it. We will see. Any constraints of scientific inquiry should be derived from reasonable concerns, right, and demonstrate risk of harm to persons, societal institutions, or society as a whole. What is reasonable? Right, disabled people are normally, and their concerns are normally not seen as reasonable within this discourse already around the discussions around genetic testing. Otherwise, I mean, they definitely lost the war on that one. So this, in essence, would mean we are again outside is about society as a whole. And we know when we're looking at society as a whole, disabled people are not, I mean, necessarily, I mean, having the same view as where society as a whole is moving. And then therefore, it's definitely not their social values, or even we assume that all disabled people have the same views, but no group has, right? No social group has. And so with even social values of disabled people make it to the front line. It's mostly the medical version of disability. These disabled people are hurt. The ones who are not in that camp, you normally don't hear. So governance, anticipatory governance assumes many abilities of the public when we have these discussions, but who has the ability to get involved is not hindered by the struggles of daily life, which might give little room for any other endeavors. I mean, if I as a disabled person can't use transportation, have no job, are poor, I mean, experience food insecurity, and then I say, okay, now you have to get involved in the debate around gene editing, that won't work, obviously. Then who has the ability to know enough early enough so that they actually still shape the discussion? As Marcy says, this discussion goes on already for a long time, and we still hardly see disability rights groups involved in this. Even things like genetic discrimination laws, the only groups which were involved, for example, in Canada, were the patient groups, not the disability rights groups. They're totally outside of that debate. Right? Who has to provide for the societal environment that allows one to take part? That's totally a haphazard, and so far we don't have that. If you actually speak up in a disability rights pride way, then you are not a disease. You get by now, if you read the comment boxes, you get a lot of pushback. And who has the ability to provide, who provides the information to whom in which way? Definitely, most information is not accessible to many disabled people. The language is not there as plain language, or you can't read it, right? If you're right, because we don't have Braille, and so on. Is the reaching out happening in such a way that one has the ability to understand the issue? I would say not, and Marcin made more or less the same point. And who has the ability to access information? Very few people. Even as a researcher, and that is not right, nothing to machine editing now. I just give you something here. This is a 2019 census survey from the Statistics Canada about the situation of Canadian university professors, instructors, teachers, or researchers. And you can see here, disabled researchers have the highest level, experience the highest level of unfair treatment, discrimination, and harassment. And if you do that, you can be sure you're not working on a topic which is, contentious. You won't get grants where you can actually question the status quo discourse around gene editing. Indeed, we have another paper out where we looked at, where we interviewed undergraduate disabled students, and they say, they feel they cannot work on the social aspect of disability because the focus is so much on medical. And that also leads to which data is generated, and the which data other people can get informed by is a very biased system. So, conclusion, so far the non-medical section of disabled people do not have a voice or influence on the strategies around how to sell or question genetic intervention on the thematic and germline level. So far, the non-medical section of disabled people is not present in the governance discussions. Given where we move with the meaning of health and disease, the medical focus of gene editing intervention does not preclude human enhancement, because eventually you will be only healthy if you are enhanced. And we are moving toward germline interventions. Thank you.